100,000 employees, and at the very peak, some estimate its total value would today have been worth almost $1 trillion. This kind of empire was pretty unheard of, but Rockefeller wasn't done yet. At this point in time, the two biggest industries were oil and railroads. So Rockefeller set out to do a similar thing he'd just done with oil, with railroads. However, as he began monopolizing another industry, he also began to become a bit of a public enemy. He was depicted as the ultimate symbol of corporate greed and cruelty. In response to Rockefeller's ever-growing empire, legislation was passed to try and prevent these kind of monopolies. In particular, the Sherman Antitrust Act was passed, which would lead to the breakup of Standard Oil into different subsidiaries. Except, over time, many of these subsidiaries would simply merge back together and are still around to this day, such as BP and Chevron. And since Rockefeller kept his share in all those companies even after they split up, it meant that at the time of his death, he was still the richest person in the world, and likely the richest self-made man in all of modern history. Now, what should we actually think about John D. Rockefeller? On the one hand, he made oil an affordable commodity and brought it to the masses. He went from nothing to building a business empire that may never be matched again. He gave around $540 million to charitable causes, which, when you adjust for inflation, makes him one of the most accomplished philanthropists ever. However, on the other hand, Rockefeller was a greedy, ruthless tyrant of business who often bullied, extorted, and exploited others on his merciless path to dominance, especially the tactics used to crush the competition. Biographer Ron Chernow argues his good side was every bit as good as his bad side was bad. Seldom has history produced such a contradictory figure. But what's undeniable is he will always be remembered for his insanely vast fortune and the impact he had. But wait, we now need to travel back in time even further, to someone who was arguably much richer than Rockefeller, and yet many people have never heard of him. However, quick side note before that, the further back in history we go, the harder it is to definitively rank wealth. When we're talking about modern history, it's a lot easier. For example, we can say with a good level of certainty that Andrew Carnegie had an empire worth around $310 billion, as he founded the Carnegie Steel Company, which later became US Steel, the first billion-dollar company in the world. We also know that Henry Ford had an empire worth around $200 billion when he died in 1947, because he founded Ford Motor Company and pioneered assembly line mass production. And so with businessmen like that, it's much easier to calculate their wealth. But once we start talking about the value of owning countries and land, things get a little blurrier. Even in present day, some people would disagree with the Forbes rich list that puts Elon Musk and Jeff Bezos as the richest people in the world. It's been argued that someone like Vladimir Putin may be the real wealthiest person alive today. It's just difficult to verify exactly what he owns. So, bearing all of that in mind, let's go back to our list of the richest people in history and venture all the way back to the 14th century, where we find Mansa Musa, considered by many historians as the richest human to ever live. Mansa Musa ruled the Mali Empire in Africa for 25 years, which was extremely rich in salt and gold. In fact, some sources estimate they were the largest gold producer in the world and had more than half of the world's total supply. And so Mansa spent the early part of his reign expanding Mali's trade routes, which allowed them to trade their gold and salt all across Africa and Asia. Under his leadership, the Mali Empire tripled in size. He conquered 24 major cities, and it's believed he never lost a battle in his lifetime. However, Mansa also got many territories to join the Mali Empire willingly, due to the relatively high quality of life that its citizens had. However, Mansa wasn't content with that. He wanted to truly put the Mali Empire on the map to the whole world. Now, since he was a devoutly religious Muslim, he'd already planned to go on a pilgrimage to Mecca, and then he realised he could use this trip as an opportunity to capture the world's attention. And thus, in 1324, he began the most extravagant pilgrimage in human history. The voyage, which would span an estimated 4,000 miles, was travelled by Mansa Musa with tens of thousands of soldiers, slaves and heralds, draped in Persian silk and carrying golden staffs. One account estimated up to 60,000 people travelled with him, each carrying up to hundreds of pounds in gold. It's fair to say it was a spectacle that got noticed. But Mansa also gave away huge amounts of gold to the poor that he met along his route. And it was also reported he built a mosque every Friday. Having said that, his generosity somewhat backfired, because it's also claimed that he spent so much gold on souvenirs during his journey that he destabilized the local economy and caused mass inflation, since these territories had never had so much gold before and he was handing it out so freely. And if you really think about that, it highlights how absurdly rich Mansa Musa was, that he essentially caused a financial crisis by spending too much on his travels. When he did finally return from his pilgrimage though, the Mali Empire had annexed Timbuktu under his orders, and he established that as the epicenter for commerce in the region. He'd also brought back with him scholars and architects, who helped him build schools and mosques. Mansa even established the first major university in the region, which could take up to 25,000 students and had one of the largest libraries in the world. All of these different building projects further elevated the city's reputation and helped attract even more top scholars from all over Africa and beyond. And therefore, many historians credit Mansa with leading the Mali Empire to even greater prosperity and development. However, whilst Mansa did indeed put the Mali Empire on the map like he wanted, it didn't quite have the intended consequences. As news of their huge wealth and gold supplies made its way to Europe, several European powers saw an opportunity to conquer the empire and take the resources for themselves. But by that point, Mansa would have died and already cemented himself in history as one of the richest people to ever live. Now, as for how rich he was, some estimates put Mansa's modern day wealth equivalent at between $400 and $500 billion. But remember, it's extremely difficult to accurately compare today's money with a fortune that was built on salt, gold and territory. So, I guess you could say, take this estimate with a very big pinch of salt. However, because historians can't quite agree on how to compare wealth from so many centuries ago, that means the title of the richest person ever is still up for debate. So, let's finish this video with 3 very honourable mentions who may be contenders. One person that could have been the richest in history is technically Genghis Khan. The fearsome Mongol leader conquered a mind-blowing 12 million square miles of land between 1206 and his death in 1227, more than anyone else in history. As he conquered all of these different kingdoms, he also took their wealth and possessions, which, combined with the value of the land that he took, would arguably have been worth trillions of dollars.